Welcome to OSEC NUC. I'm Mark Zapatowski, and I'm not the person coughing, but someone is, and they're coming right through to you, live. And actually, we are having technical difficulties, and we're getting a replay that's coming right through, so you're hearing me speak over and over again, the same thing. We're getting a replay. Okay, and the technical difficulties are over, and I'm Mark Zapatowski. This is OSEC NUC. This is brought to you by the CTV Society, also known as the Society for Economic Equality. For the last 17 years, last month, in fact, CTV has been, for 19 years, CTV has been producing this television show, and here we are in our 20th year and the last show of our 19th season. We're going to take a 2-month break, and for this last show of the 2013-2014 season, we're going to be looking at Terminal America, the shocking end of the dream. CTV is going to take a look at the film Death by China, which is by Professor Peter Navarro, a Harvard graduate and a professor at University of California, Irvine. He's an economist and a School of Public Policy type person, and he calls the contemporary relationship between the United States and China since 2000, when China entered the WTO, a very predatory relationship on the part of China and on the part of the American wealthy and the American corporate system. 57,000 American factories have shut down, and largely these same factories have packed up and moved their operations to China. In certain cases, after several years, China simply takes over those individual concerns and factories outright by locking the doors and then reopening up as a Chinese owned enterprise. In other cases, they just take the intellectual property and set up competing businesses after several years of the Americans operating. So 25 million jobs, essentially, that were manufacturing jobs have been lost. These are the same 25 million people who can't find jobs in the United States now. Also, the phenomenon of the loss of the manufacturing base in the United States has meant that even white-collar jobs are now harder for people to find and maintain in the United States. Doctors, lawyers, engineers, software designers, all of these things, because of the internet, are now being targeted by Chinese corporations as well, and to an extent, Indian and other formerly third world locations are, because of the internet and because of a lower cost standard of living, lower labor costs, these end up being the sources of the loss of further American jobs. So maybe Anthony, who spent 9.5 years in China, might introduce just a little bit of his, like for about a minute, his views on the film as well.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Yeah, I think the problem is epidemic, really, and when we've been talking personally about it. So we've had a lot of personal discussions about it, and we understand, but I think a lot of people feel that it's more of a issue with manufacturing. So a lot of people think that this is a manufacturing issue. A lot of factories are leaving, but we don't want factory jobs. And I think, as the film points out, which is really enlightening on this matter, is that it's not just manufacturing jobs. It's actually R&D. It's white-collar jobs. It's all kinds of jobs.
We're having a problem with, okay. As I was saying, it's a film by Peter Navarro. Artistically, you may notice that the film uses a kind of cartoon World War II graphic to illustrate the trade war that China has been carrying out against the United States, using weapons of mass job destruction and industry destruction and targeting. And I find it very interesting because it seems to harken back to World War II, and actually I think specifically, if you look at it closely, you see the graphics that are really kind of the product of the game Axis and Allies. And in the game Axis and Allies, a board game by Milton Bradley, the United States almost always is on the victorious side because the United States has, by far, the largest industrial output in the game. And that's why the US won World War II. That's why the US was such a world power up to this point. But the US actually has lost its industrial base to such a degree that it's extremely frightening and it threatens national security. So if we could start looking at our little bits of the film by Peter Navarro, Death by China. We'll continue talking for a few more seconds, let Anthony kind of introduce some more of his views, if he could, if we could start seeing that roll in at any time. Okay, go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, so we're going to see here the roll in here, and we can see a knife going through the United States here. And it's kind of bloody, and the knife says "Made in China," and there's no sound here, but I think it kind of illustrates some of the type of imagery that the film wants to convey.
It's a World War II bayonet, is what it is, for instance.
I think that the water's going to get hotter and hotter, and if there's no event to wake people up, I think China can just own more and more and more and more of our debt, and everything's fine until that magical moment when it's not, and all the sorries in the world aren't going to make that any different.
I'm here to buy me a big screen TV. My first big screen, man. 40 inch, but 265.
Where's that product made?
Probably in China.
China.
This is made in China.
Do you know where that bike was made?
No, but I know it's happy.
Where were these products made, do you know?
Probably from China, where else, everything else made.
Oh, made in America.
Well, American is better.
So is this American?
I'm I'm not sure if it is American, but hopefully it is.
Yeah, I think I got a great deal. Can't beat $300 for a 46-inch TV.
Tell you the truth, I didn't even come here exactly for this, but I seen it and couldn't pass up the deal, man. For, $200, you can't really, beat that. So they told me it was $200, and now it's in my cart now,
Did you see where it was made?
Oh yeah, it was made in China. Hey, I'm fine with it. If the American people can't provide me with what I need, I gotta get it from China. Hey, it is what it is, I'm just being truthful, Don't hate me.
So when a large company decides to move its production offshore and it closes a factory in a city or a town in the United States, that basically it's like a black hole. Suddenly that factory just disappears and everything else goes down with people who were supplying that plant with materials, equipment, maintenance services, even the accounting firms, design firms, R&D firms, and then all the other services around it like restaurants. What happens to them? They're doomed. They go down with it. They can't follow that company offshore to Shanghai.
We've never had a
Never
really
tried this.
big and hostile country come into.
Oh, we should never try for perfection because it's never going to happen here at CTV. And if we could save the rest of that roll-in and come back as soon as possible, that would be great.
Play that with VLC. Tell them to open it with VLC.
But anyway, you just saw a little bit of the film Death by China. It's by Dr. Professor Peter Navarro, UC Irvine, and just cut right in on me as soon as it's ready because we really want to see that. And Death by China, yes, how 25 million American jobs have been lost since 2000. 57,000 factories closed and shipped to China. Let's go.
The offshoring of American factories and American jobs to China. Today, as a result of the biggest political shell game in American economic history, China has stolen thousands.
Oh, it is stuck. Oh.
Okay.
No. Anthony, we should
okay.
never try and stop them once something starts because it only gets worse.
That's okay.
Yeah,
well, it's okay. I think made in China, maybe. The technology.
So anytime that's ready, we go to it. But again, 57,000 factories in 14 years have been shipped to China from the United States. The actual factories have been emptied. The machines have been shipped over. People have even been shipped over to China for a while before being laid off to show the Chinese people how to operate the machinery.
First time our companies will be able to sell and distribute products in China made by workers here in America.
So just what has America's future looked like since China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001?
We are in a trade
is there any
war,
way to go
and
back to the
stealing,
part that we
lying,
lost?
and cheating on the part of the Chinese is all part of it.
Okay, we're going to send reinforcements. Okay, there it goes. And so, 57,000 factories lost since the year 2000. In the year 2000, the President of the United States, he makes some speeches. He says, well, this will make the United States more affluent than ever before. We'll be shipping products to China. And the Chinese have promised to open their markets. They're not going to manipulate their currency anymore. Everything's going to be wonderful, and China will be influenced to become a democratic society. And he said, this is a win-win. This is a win-win, Clinton said. And just like he said, you know, in terms of NAFTA, that there would be no giant sucking sound. And that's after he ran against NAFTA while he was running for the presidency. He changed his mind as soon as he came in, and he was against opening up our economy to China when he ran originally, but as soon as he got in, guess what? Hey, WTO, open up everything to China. But actually, it wasn't the Chinese markets that were opened, it was our economy that leaked out. Our technology, our factories were shipped over to China, set up in China where there were no pollution laws, there were no labor laws. There's actually child labor, there's actually slave labor, there's prison labor. It is the most contaminated environment in the world, and our air over the United States is actually dirtier because of it. 25% of the air pollution in California is now coming from China. I noticed this past winter that every morning there was a grit in my cat's water bowls that were outside. And I said, what is this? There's like this little gritty, sooty particles coming down out of the sky every morning. I have never seen this before. And I believe that that jet stream carried heavy, heavy Chinese pollution that just drops down on us these days. We have, in the United States, as the film will point out, there is today there's a $2.7 billion annual machine tool industry. Machine tools are used to make machines so that you can produce things in a manufacturing economy. The machine tools are tools that make the machines that make machines, or that make machines. Now, we used to have a much bigger machine tool economy in the United States, and some people say that since this film was made, the $2.7 billion annual machine tool economy is now completely gone. But China has a $30 billion, 10 times that size machine tool industry. There's a guy that you'll see in this film, and he says, if you have no machine tool industry, you have no industry. You have no manufacturing base. You have no possibility of easily producing one. So I guess the reason for using the World War II Axis and Allies kind of cartoon graphics from World War II, really the pieces that you see are very much Axis and Allies, the classic World War II control the world game. The reason for it is that without an industrial base, a country cannot have national security. It cannot win a world war. And my housemate, a guy with a couple master's degrees, recently told me that he had heard that a prominent Chinese general had made a speech to the People's Army saying that the United States must be destroyed.
Network, it stole its source code, and now Baidu has more than 75% of the China search market. This shows that basically Beijing wants
Intellectual property of an American corporation. Sometimes they just take the whole company.
So, fellows.
And this is why I really prefer DVDs, and I don't trust these computers because they so often mess up, and I warned Anthony about this, and I even often, I mean, a DVD, at least, it's a physical thing, and it will not mess up this badly. So, yes. And there's no sound, and it's going all weird. And here and there, you're seeing little bits and pieces of
these products made, you know?
Probably from China, where else, everything else made.
Oh, made in America. Well, American is better.
So is this American?
I'm not sure if it is American, but hopefully it is. Yeah, I think I got a great deal. Can't beat $300 for a 46-inch TV.
Tell you the truth, I didn't even come here exactly for this, but I seen it and couldn't pass up the deal, man. For, $200, you can't really, beat that. So they told me it was $200, and now it's in my cart now,
Did you see where it was made?
Oh yeah, it was made in China. hey, I'm fine with it. You know, if the American people can't provide me with what I need, I gotta get it from China. Hey, it is what it is, you know. I'm just being truthful, you know. Don't hate me.
So you're in a massive jobless recovery.
So when a large company decides to move its production offshore and it closes a factory in a city or town in the United States, that basically it's like a black hole. Suddenly that factory just disappears and everything else goes down with people who were supplying that plant with materials, equipment, maintenance services, even the accounting firms, design firms, R&D firms, and then all the other services around it like restaurants. What happens to them? They're doomed. They go down with it. They can't follow that company offshore to Shanghai. United States, China produces almost $20 billion. Machine tools, where we produce $2.7 billion. China's consumption is 10 times that amount. If you don't have a machine tool industry, what, do you have an industry? It's a basic component of an industry.
Again, this is why I prefer DVDs. Even VHS on occasion, I prefer to this kind of situation, really. Yes. Again, Death by China, a film by Peter Navarro, Professor Peter Navarro, Irvine, UC, and can the United States actually remain an independent and secure power in the world with a $3 trillion debt to China and no industrial capacity, no machine tool capacity, virtually no steel manufacturing. China actually this year became the world's largest economy. A few years ago we were being told that it would be 20 years before that happened, and in something like 4 or 5 years it happened. The acceleration is incredible, and it's not really so much that China is, such a nation of supermen and women. It's that the United States wealthy people and the corporations have just shipped over the U.S. economy.
When a nuclear bomb
and
on that bomb, we're going to say made in China.
Yeah. So anyway, the Chinese general, you heard the joke about the Chinese general recently. He made a speech to the People's Army. Friend of mine, he found this, I forget what his source was, but I believe I heard something about this, but he knew more details of it. He said the guy made a very vile speech saying that the Americans, the United States, needed to be destroyed because this was an out-of-control nation. And this was the mission of the Chinese nation, to supplant the United States in the world, to teach the United States a lesson, et cetera, et cetera. The admiral, who's currently the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, head of the Pentagon, head of the U.S. Armed Forces, highest-ranking military uniformed official in the United States, said that China is now rapidly accelerating its military development based on its dominance in the global economy, its dominance in manufacturing, and is targeting the American.
We've never had a really big and hostile country come into our markets. And most of the international competition that we have faced from Japan, from Germany, from the rest of Europe has come without a sense that behind it was a government that has sought confrontations with the United States on a regular basis.
The WTO, it's not based here. I mean, who in the United States is on the WTO? Does anybody know?
In 2001, China joined the WTO, the World Trade Organization, with the strong support of a Democratic president and a Republican-controlled Congress. Before the ink was dry on this free trade agreement, China began flooding American markets with its illegally subsidized and very dangerous exports, while the big multinational companies that had lobbied heavily for the agreement rapidly accelerated the offshoring of American factories and American jobs to China. Today, as a result of the biggest political shell game in American economic history, China has stolen thousands of our factories and millions of our jobs. Multinational corporation profits are soaring, and we now owe over $3 trillion to the world's largest communist nation. In masterfully arguing for China's entry into the World Trade Organization, President Clinton promised the brightest of futures for both American workers and American manufacturers.
Economically, this agreement is the equivalent of a one-way street. It requires China to open its markets with a fifth of the world's population, potentially the biggest markets in the world. For the first time, China will agree to play by the same open trading rules we do. Never happened before. For the first time, our companies will be able to sell and distribute products in China made by workers here in America.
So just what has America's future looked like since China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001?
We are in a trade war, and stealing, lying, and cheating on the part of the Chinese is all part of it.
Free trade's great stuff if you can get it. What we have with China is not free trade.
For China to sell something at 1/10 of the price of what it would cost in the United States to produce, they are cheating monumentally, in a major, massive sort of way, on everything.
When China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, it promised to stop cheating and play by fair trade rules. That meant abandoning unfair trade practices like currency manipulation, illegal export subsidies, and abusing its workers. Instead, the Chinese government has used these weapons of job destruction to launch a sustained and devastating attack on America's factories and jobs, while flooding our markets with dangerous products.
Welcome back to the live portion of Osei Can You See? Tonight we're reviewing the film Death by China by Professor Dr. Peter Navarro, a University of California, Irvine professor of public policy and economics. And you see the idea there that China is specifically engaged in a trade war with the United States to destroy American industry. However, you can say that China has targeted American industry and is destroying American industry, knocking it out by subsidies. Those industries then become exclusively Chinese industries, and the end of the American industrial base ends up being the result. However, it's also true that our own wealthy, our own corporate elites have very actively engaged in this war against the United States economy, people, and industrial base themselves. They very eagerly participated in this process. It would have been impossible without our wealthy going ahead and betraying the United States and destroying its industrial base by taking it over to China and setting it up there. After a few years, it becomes entirely Chinese, by the way. Right now, Boeing, 4 years ago, Boeing reached its peak in the Seattle area of 50,000 employees. Now it's 30,000 employees because 20,000 of those jobs were laid off, and the plants are actually being set up in China. Boeing and Airbus from Europe and other aircraft manufacturers are all moving to China and plan to become essentially Chinese corporations in the next couple of years. So this is a dire kind of situation. Couple seconds, comments on the first
Yeah, I mean, I like, I was living in Seattle actually in 2001 when the WTO riots were going on, and I was watching, we were talking about this, I was watching 10,000 labor union people belonging to the labor union marching with anarchists and so forth. And I thought to myself, why are they doing this? Why is this important? And I think because, you know, if we believe in what Clinton
we see
said,
why it is important here now.
Yeah. if we believe in what Clinton said, he said this is going to be good for the American economy. This is going to be good for jobs in the United States. But obviously,
well, Clinton said it was a win-win, meaning there was no downside. Actually, it was a win-win for rich persons like himself, his friends. But it was a lose-lose for the American people, for the American constitutional order. It is easy to imagine that America, the United States, might not survive this situation. Think of what the U.S. will be without jobs, without industry. You know, how vulnerable, if a world war were to start up, the U.S. could not prevail. The U.S., as it is right now, or as it's evolving, what it's evolving into, would only last a couple years and then be defeated. It would be the opposite of the World War II situation. The U.S. was able to survive the long haul because it had such an industrial base. And we have allowed it to be destroyed. So we're ready for our next little piece of the film by Dr. Professor Peter Navarro, Death by China, about the Chinese trade war against the United States and the war against the United States and the American people by our own elites who have betrayed us.
It's not all about China currency manipulation, but a lot of it is.
China manipulates its currency by illegally pegging the value of the Chinese yuan to that of the U.S. dollar at a rate far below market value.
Most economists would say that China gets anywhere from a 25 to 40 cent advantage for every dollar.
So it's like having a tariff on goods coming from the United States of 40 or 50% by the amount that they're underpricing the currency. It also gives their exports to the United States a subsidy of 40 or 50% to capture our market and knock out domestic industries that might be competing with them.
Simply, an undervalued currency makes Chinese coffee makers $10 a piece instead of 15 or 20, and it makes American cars in China $30,000 instead of 25.
In other words, China's manipulated currency acts as a huge subsidy to Chinese exports to America and an equally big tariff barrier blocking American exports to China. The result, more jobs in China, fewer jobs in America, and a huge and chronic American trade deficit with China. The Chinese government does not deny this.
Chinese officials themselves say that they fix the value of their currencies to help Chinese workers. When Premier Wen Jiabao was in this country recently, he said, if we allow the currency to float, Chinese companies are going to go bankrupt. Okay, but what about American workers?
Welcome back to the live portion of Oh Say Can You See, brought to you by the CTV Society, also known as the Society for Economic Equality. Now in its 20th year, we've just reached the 19-year point. Last show of this season. We are, after this next clip, open to your telephone calls. We do hope that you call in. This is a live show. This is July 2nd, 2014. And these are the last years of the United States, according to what looks like an actual dire situation here in the film Death by China that we've been seeing by Peter Navarro. And get to your phone, get ready to call in, and let's see some more of that film if we can.
They're cheating on the intellectual property by just flat out pirating stuff from the United States.
You don't want China to get their hands on your latest piece of technology or whatever, because they will copy it and they will turn around and produce it.
Most famously, copyright pirates in China are stamping out Disney DVDs. That's what everybody knows of. What's more important is the theft of the blueprints, for example, for high technologies. I mean, I hear all the time about American companies who find themselves competing in the marketplace with a Chinese product, and they take it apart and they find themselves looking in the mirror because the Chinese have just stolen the plans of their own product.
And one of America's highest tech companies has certainly experienced this kind of piracy firsthand, and a school of very hard knocks at the hands of the Chinese government.
Google came into the Chinese market, and of course it ended up with a dominant market share. but Beijing wanted Baidu, a local company, to be able to outpace Google. What Beijing did was it hacked Google's network, it stole its source code, and now Baidu has more than 75% of the China search market. This shows that basically Beijing wants the local companies to be the national champions.
But sometimes Chinese pirates aren't content just to steal the intellectual property of an American corporation. Sometimes they just take the whole company.
So Fellows is a company that makes shredders, paper shredders, and they moved, like everybody, they moved their production to China. They hired a company to run their production for them, and suddenly one day their employees were locked out of their own plant. So Fellows went from having a large production base in China one day to the next day their partner suddenly shut them off, shut them down. The moral of the Fellows story is you better be very careful when you move your production to a communist country.
Welcome back to Oh Say Can You See. Again, the film Death by China, and yes, this is CTV and we are live, 459-4881, that's the number to call. This is July 2nd, and you can call in to the last show of this season. You will only be seeing reruns during this particular live time slot, and for the next 2 months. So this is your last chance to call in and let us know what you think about what has happened to jobs in the United States. 25 million lost manufacturing jobs in 14 years, 57,000 factories shut down, largely just moved to China by American corporations. And the Chinese industrial base, far superior to the US industrial base. This year, China in real dollars, not the artificially lowered value Chinese dollars, is actually the largest economy in the world sometime this year in real economic units. So all those predictions about how this was going to be 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, that the US would remain secure, and it's a fallacy. And the United States is endangered. Quick comment before we take our next
well, I think that you also you mentioned the 57,000 factories since 2001, but we're actually been in globalization, and factories have been going to China since the 1980s, and but it's been accelerated since 2001. I think it's also what scares me the most, being a aspiring white collar worker, is the fact that not only manufacturing jobs, but it's hollowing out our white collar, our R&D, and also potentially the rise of the Chinese military based on the back of our technology. I think that's a scary thought.
It's mentioned in this film that there's no American military aircraft that can be manufactured in the United States without significant parts of it coming from China now. Yep. They actually have the flight control panel displays entirely made in China. So they have access to everything that we have now. And how does that make the United States secure? It makes me wonder, what the agenda of our own corporate elites were. I actually do not think that in any way they had the interests of the United States at heart, and I think that they are actually hostile to the American people and the interests of the United States. To the extent that we remain democratic at all, we are a threat to their best interests. I think that we demonstrated that in the 60s and the early 70s, and it freaked them out, and I think that's one reason that they've been driving us down through the world economy.
And I think on top of that, like you were talking about, I think that the elite of the United States see the American unions and the American general population of America as a threat in a way to them. So they love the fact
we like justice, and we seek equality for peoples, and these are things, keeping people divided and keeping people down through various forms of injustices are how elites control people, even in the United States. So late 60s, early 70s, freaked them out. They said, whoa, we almost had a real, full-blown democratic revolution. We've got to do something about this. And I think what they did was they knocked us down. They took away our rising expectations. They took away our self-confidence. Most Americans run around saying, oh, everything's inevitable. Decline is inevitable. Oh, it's all inevitable. America's over. Inevitable. When in the U.S. history did people walk around, oh, inevitable, no hope, inevitable, never have a job, oh, I'm going to be poor all my life, never have anything. But that is the average condition now, and it's a fire that's running through all of society because the factory people have lost their jobs. But people who would have been the white-collar people have lost their jobs too, a lot of them, and it's a fire that's it's like a burning match. It's rising up through the orders of society. And engineers, doctors, lawyers are finding work hard to get because, hey, the internet, the wonderful internet and the global, what we need are tariffs. The tariff walls that used to exist meant that the US, which has the resources and has the talent, was an economic world unto itself, and it was secure and it was affluent. And when we brought down those tariff walls around 1970 and began the world economy, that's when the standard of living started dropping. The US essentially was an insular economy, and when it was the envy of the world. And now we're the goat of the world. If we could see our final clip from Death by China, we'll be back, and hopefully you can call in and we'll have some ability to talk to you and see what you think about Death by China and the end of the American dream.
It most certainly will result in more unemployment in the U.S. and to the advantage of China. We're chumps.
So just how big of a chump has America been for supporting China's entry into the World Trade Organization in 2001?
It's like we're in the Super Bowl of globalization, and in fact we're being taken apart.
And when you tally up the score on China's rapid military buildup, this too is clear.
China is the only major nation in the world that is preparing to kill Americans.
And of course, when you count the jobs lost and factories gone, and millions of Americans out of work.
American manufacturing has been in an absolute crisis over the last decade.
5.5 million manufacturing jobs gone.
57,000 manufacturing facilities closed in this nation.
So you're in a massive jobless recovery. You've got 28 million women and men who are in various stages of unemployment, twice the official number.
When you tally up all these scores, it's crystal clear that China's entry into the World Trade Organization has been both a losing and a very dangerous proposition. Even as America has all but completely surrendered its manufacturing base to China.
We don't make a single cell phone in the United States. Not one is made in the United States.
There is not a single modern flat panel display factory in the United States. Does that matter? Are flat panel displays important for military applications? I think so. They're widely used. Every airplane, every helicopter has them.
The United States right now is unable to put a single military aircraft into the sky without using components built by potential adversaries.
We produce about $3 billion worth of printed circuit boards in the United States. China produces almost $20 billion. Machine tools, where we produce $2.7 billion. China's consumption was 10 times that amount. If you don't have a machine tool industry, do you have an industry? It's a basic component of an industrial economy.
China's military power is strengthening very, very rapidly.
They are building up their military capabilities in hard weapons as well as in cybersecurity.
China has a population which is about 5 times the size of the United States. And that means that if they have a comparable level of development, they probably will end up with a military 5 times larger. I don't care what kind of technological edge we have, it would be very difficult to prevail over an adversary that is 5 times larger.
What China is building is just not a massive fleet or a massive ground army, but it's developing a modern, well-equipped, technologically capable military.
We are on the onset of an age of nuclear terrorism. We see Pakistan crumbling while it builds more and more nuclear weapons. Why does Pakistan have nuclear weapons? Why does it have the missiles to deliver them? Because of China. We've been in a near 30-year dialogue with the Chinese government trying to arrest this behavior that is supporting not only Pakistan's, but North Korea's and Iran's future nuclear capabilities. China refuses to listen and respond. When a nuclear bomb goes off on some highway, either inside or outside the Beltway, chances are a lot of those components on that bomb are going to say made in China.
The film Death by China by Peter Navarro, author of the book Death by China, filmmaker. The film Death by China, parts of which you've seen here tonight and that we are reviewing. He's a University of California Irvine professor, a graduate of Harvard. He is part of the School of Business, School of Economics and of Public Policy. And he essentially is saying that the United States risks its national security by giving away its industrial base. The corporations, our own wealthy, our elites, our financial investors have invested in China, have moved to China and abandoned the United States. So China is a threat. Our own elites have participated in that threat very eagerly, and we as a people and a nation are very much endangered, and people should be aware of that. And it's a live call-in show, 459-4881. Please call in if you have any comments to make, any observations or objections to what was presented in the film, or by myself, Mark Zabatowski, and tonight, my guest, Tony Harper, who's not actually a member of our CTV group, but I'm a member, and on behalf of the other members here, the crew, and people who aren't here, members, we ask you to call in, and thank you for watching this TV season. Tony Harper, your observations now that we've gone through these clips of the film.
Well, I was, as you know, I was a teacher in China for 10 years. So
in
I have
what city?
Chengdu, Sichuan, in the
Where
southwest.
is that?
It's in the southwest of China. It's the fourth largest urban area of the country.
Isn't that where all the iPhones are made?
It's where all the iPads are made.
iPads.
And it's also home to a lot of big corporations.
Motorola, right?
Ubisoft, so many.
Formerly American
or still American by name, but one thing I noticed, I guess, why I say that I lived there a long time, is that I see that the fascist government I guess I would call them a fascist government, in clear vision. I see them clearly, because essentially what they're doing is they have an amazing amount of control on their people. I mean, what country can tell 1.3 billion, officially probably about 1.5 billion unofficially, what country can actually tell its people you can only have one child? That's essentially the level of central control that the government has over its people. Well, if it has that level of central control over its people, it also has that level of central control over its economy. It has that control over every aspect of the society. So if the Chinese government, who is totally corrupt, totally fascist, wants to take on the world, they can, really. And what they're doing is they're building up all their power with the help of the United States, which I think is kind of ridiculous. So it's kind of scary. I mean, from a cultural perspective, and also the WTO is about 150 nations, and most of those countries don't like us anyway, as you know. So most of those countries think that America is the police of the world. And so I mean, a lot of China's power and a lot of this taking away of power from the United States, it's to the liking of a lot of countries outside of America. So it's not really in the best interest of the American people, obviously, And I just think giving this kind of power to a government like China is ridiculous, Well,
it's an unanswerable government. It's a government that is absolutely poisoning its landscape, its people. There's really virtually no rule of law. There's an iron fist from the party and its government. But about 10 years ago, there was an episode of Frontline by PBS, and it was something like "What Happened to the Tank Man?" And it was about looking back, years later. What it was, the 20 years since there had been, more. Well, anyway, it was the Tiananmen Square tank man, the guy that got out there with the flags, and he was in front of the tank, and he'd go this way and that way, and the tank didn't know what to do. And they thought, oh, what a brave guy. Well, what did happen to him? Well, he's dead. Tank man died. And so the deeper story was, how many people really died? What really happened? Well, it turned out there was an English language broadcast from Radio China out of Beijing, went on for 4 hours, and the English-speaking Chinese guy said, tragic events in this city today, tens of thousands of people have been killed in the streets of Beijing. The city went into uprising. It wasn't just a few hundred or a few thousand people. It was 30,000 people, maybe 50,000 people were killed. People came out and tried to prevent the army from getting to the square. Some columns of tanks turned back, but eventually the word got out, go forward or the units in back of you will be ordered to kill you. And so the units had to go forward, and they started blasting through the population. They were blasting into the high-rise apartments where people were banging pots and pans and saying, fascists get out or fascists go back, and it was horrendous. So what I understand from even more recent anniversary NPR kind of BBC, NPR sort of evaluations of Tiananmen Square now and looking back, is that after Tiananmen, the government of China said, we have to have rapid economic development, and we also have to have massive nationalism and militarism, and these two things are the only things that will satisfy the ambition and the nationalism of the people so that we can maintain control. Otherwise, we'll lose control to this democracy thing. So we have a lot to fear if all this imbalancing produces an imbalance in China, and China's economy actually falters at some point because our economy falters and there's no more vampirization of the victim, then China may be forced to become aggressive toward the rest of the world and toward the United States in order to continue to maintain control of its own population.
Well,
and that's a great danger too. I mean, the situation's full of dangers.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say something on that. Actually, when I was teaching classes in China, I would put up a flag of Africa. Actually, believe Africa, and what China's been doing.
Oh, the ANC flag.
The Chinese flag over Africa.
Oh, okay.
So basically, China knows this, and it's a sort of bulldog in the region already, and they're already looking farther out into Africa, Southeast Asia. They sell a lot of products to India. And if you ask any European, this is not only America that's suffering from this. A lot of joblessness in the EU, a lot of joblessness around the world. There's one city in China that makes 2/3 of the world's socks. I mean, when you think about, you just think about those numbers.
China makes 99% of all American shoes.
Yeah, over 90% of what you buy in Walmart, and Walmart is international. I mean, so this is not, China is actually gobbling up not only American jobs, but really all jobs all over the planet, really, in developing countries especially.
Chinese military / economic ambitions globally can be seen in Africa. 10 years ago already, there were reports that there were, at that time, 50,000 Chinese troops based in Africa. And I'm sure that that number must be much larger at this point, where Chinese have industrial and mining interests, et cetera, in Africa or other places. They tend to actually install the army, although they're called like company security guards, but it's the people's army. But they just have slightly different uniforms, same equipment, same training. Actually, everyone knows it's the people's army, but it's called like, you know, Chengdu mining or something, whatever.
Well, what's scary too, I think, is that they because they have stolen all the technology, because of IPR theft, because they're willing to pollute their own environment to get rich, because they're willing to have lower standards and so forth. Basically, they've built up this. This huge power that's really, it's becoming like a big snowball, essentially. And I don't know what the world is going to really be able to do. I mean, what are we going to be able to do after they become so big? We're going to have, as there was one debate going on, a University of Michigan professor, it's really hard to stop something after it gets so far, you know?
Well, I would say that we have no choice but to stop it. If we do not reverse the situation and defend ourselves as a people and a nation, we'll lose it. And we have nothing to lose by trying not to lose, but we have everything to lose by losing. So people need to think of this as a very political issue to start getting involved in, because it's our survival, it's our nation, it's our identity. We'll lose it. And thank you for watching the 19th season of Oh Say Can You See, brought to you by the CTV Society, also known as the Society for Economic Equality. I'm Mark Zapotowski. I've been here with my co-host guest tonight, Tony Harper, who spent 10 years working as a teacher of English in China in the city of Chengdu. And we'll see you again, live shows in 2 months, and you can see reruns on the 1st, the 2nd, and the 3rd Wednesday of every month for the next 2 months. And then we will be live again starting in the middle of September. Also, the reruns are every Tuesday, 6 to 7, and will continue to be. And last final words, Tony, on...
Buy American?
Buy American if you can.
If you can.
Well, you know, go out to your farmer's market.
That's going to be hard.
Most of that is not from China.
That's going to be hard, though.
Oh, yeah, you know, we actually supply China with enough food that China is not self-sufficient on food. So we do export food to China because they used to be self-sufficient, but when they actually moved so many people into manufacturing, formerly U.S. manufacturing, they stopped being able to feed themselves. So that's another interesting fun fact. I'm Mark Zapotowski. Thank you for watching, and see you in a couple months.
Wow.
I still say DVDs. That thing was awful.
Yeah.
And I've seen it happen over and over and over again. And I told you, Tony, I told you that it always fucks up. It fucks up so many times. I'm really sick of it. That's why I say no.